Hello, everybody. We're here with my favorite senator, the great senator from the state of Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren. There is an enormous amount of stuff that is going on right now. It gets a little bit complicated. Stay with us. We got a lot of work to do. Let me begin by asking Elizabeth her sense of what happened at 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday, the tax bill passed by the Republicans. Elizabeth?
Well, so the Republicans rammed through a tax bill. Nobody even really had time to read it, but we got the general outlines. And the general outlines were giant giveaways for big corporations and for billionaires, paid for on the backs of working families, on the backs of students, on the backs of people who get up every day and work hard for a living and try to live paycheck to paycheck. It's, robbed from working people to give to the wealthy.
When you go back to Massachusetts and have gone back there, do you find all kinds of people saying, Elizabeth, what you have got to do is provide massive tax breaks to billionaires, lower the corporate tax rates so that companies in Massachusetts can leave the state to go to foreign countries? And by the way, Elizabeth, you better raise taxes for working families or we're not going to vote for you. Is that what you're hearing back home?
That's actually not what I'm hearing back in Massachusetts. In fact, Bernie, that's what really gets me about this. I hear from working families back in Massachusetts, but I also hear from small businesses who say, I don't get to take advantage of that stuff. I don't have tax accounts in the Cayman Islands. I don't offshore my manufacturing. People who are just tired of having the playing field tilted against them. And the Republicans have said, big problem, so we're going to make it worse.
And by the way, for all of you who are hedge fund managers planning to set up residency in the Virgin Islands, do we have something for you?
Yeah, there you go.
We got a deal for you.
Unbelievable.
But if you are a middle-class person, the expectation is that at the end of 10 years, you're going to be paying more in taxes. And there's another part of this whole thing that bothers me very, very much. I think all of you will recall that during the presidential campaign, Donald Trump said over and over and over again, he's a different type of Republican. He is not going to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Literally, minutes after they pass this disastrous bill in the Senate, the discussion escalates. Of course, they're going to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And you know why? This is shocking. The deficit is
deficit's going up. That's right. That's right. So they want to run up the deficit and then say a high debt is the reason that we've got to cut.
Can you believe this?
All the things for working people.
I mean, it is.
But here's the part that really gets, we could do this all day, but the part that really gets to me about this is why do this? Why would anyone say, let's tax working families in order to give giant tax breaks to billionaires? And the answer is because their billionaire donors want that. This is nothing but payoff. I have to say, Bernie, I thought the whole game was over, just going to be totally over a couple of weeks ago, when the Republican congressman steps up and says, hey, I've been told by my donors that if we don't deliver on this tax deal, they've said, don't call me back. That when they went on the Sunday talk shows and said, our corporate donors really want this. The money's going to dry up for the Republicans if they don't deliver huge tax giveaways to billionaires and set up that the government will cut its basic support on Social Security, on Medicare, on Medicaid.
This is what the Koch brothers and other billionaires have been dreaming about for years.
Yeah, dreaming about and working on.
Spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So what we saw at 2 o'clock in the morning on Friday was the corruption of a campaign finance system and a political system now, which is almost completely controlled by billionaires and large campaign contributors. Nobody, no poll out there comes close to suggesting that this is what the American people want. But what Elizabeth said is the simple truth. The American people don't want tax breaks for billionaires, but the billionaires do. And the next step is to try to destroy the entire safety net of this country, which has protected the needs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor, and working families since FDR.
Yep.
That's where we are right now. And I hope everybody knows that. And I hope everybody is prepared to stand up and fight back, because we are at a pivotal moment, and we have got to win this struggle. All right, let me get to something else right now. Elizabeth, you are more than aware, as I am, that the federal government is going to run out of money on Friday.
Yep.
Unless Congress passes a new spending bill.
Right. And we've known about this deadline for a long time. But instead of focusing on it, Republicans have been working on this tax bill, trying to pay off their big donors. And they have been on the attack after working families. So what we're now doing is we're saying back to these Republicans, it's time for you to do your job.
That's right. Now, I don't have to explain, we don't have to explain to anybody who's watching the enormous problems facing this country. We could spend 5 hours talking about that.
5 days, 5 weeks.
All right, but let's tick off some of the urgent measures that need to be dealt with literally in the next couple of weeks. Elizabeth?
Right. Well, we need to work to keep the government open.
Right.
Right? We also got to pass the DREAM Act, the Clean DREAM Act right now.
Let's talk about that just for a moment. I hope everybody knows what we are talking about when we discuss the DREAM Act. What Trump wants to do is to end the legal protection for some 800,000 young people, beautiful young people, who came to this country at a very young age. Some of them are in university, some of them in the military. Many of them have good and important jobs, which are an essential part of our economy.
Right.
And Trump is ending that program, and it's absolutely imperative that in the Congress we protect the legal status of those folks.
Right. You know, our country made a promise to these young people a few years back and said, if you come out of the shadows, if you register, if you're vetted, then we're going to help you. You can get an education, you can get a job, you can serve in the military, you can follow your dreams. America honors its promises, and that's what the DREAM Act is all about. Donald Trump broke that promise, but Congress has the chance to put that promise back in place and give our young dreamers, people, you know, many of whom have known no other country,
right,
give them a chance to be here legally, to be a part of America.
And like many other issues, and let's be clear about this, the American people support the
Yes.
Dreamers. It is only the extreme right wing and their anti-immigrant vision who are opposed to making sure that these young people who have lived in this country virtually their entire lives have the legal status they need.
Right.
Okay?
Okay, so we're going to do that one. That one's right at the top of our agenda.
All right, let's get to another issue of enormous consequence. And this one really drives me completely nuts, because here you have Republicans, trying to destroy the Affordable Care Act. Unfortunately, we're able to beat them back on that. And now they want to pass huge tax breaks for the wealthy and large corporations. And in the midst of all of that, they have allowed to expire 2 enormously important health programs that benefit tens of millions of children and working people.
Yep. So that means our priority is also to renew the funding for our community health centers and for our children's health insurance program, for community health and for CHIP. We got to be there. This is important. And by the way, this is something that has been renewed over and over on a bipartisan basis. It tells you how out of line this current Republican leadership is in Congress.
Absolutely.
Okay, but this isn't just about defense, right? We are in this because the government funding fight is both about whether to keep the lights on, that's the bare minimum, but it's ultimately about our values, about what our country invests in. So we want to talk about priorities, the kinds of things that we think the government should be investing in, and that's something we could do in the budget that's coming up.
And by the way, every single item that we are going to be talking about this morning, our demand as to what the Congress should pass has massive popular support, unlike the Republican agenda. Let's start it off. Child care.
Okay, so I want to start off with child care. Bernie, you and I have talked about this for a long time. We know what's happened. Over the past generation, wages have stayed flat. The cost of childcare has gone up by nearly 1,000%. And that puts economic pressure on working moms and dads. It forces parents to make really hard compromises about the quality of the care that they can afford. We can do better than that. If Congress doubles the funding for the Child Care and Development Fund in this year's spending bill, we could provide access to child care assistance for nearly 250,000 kids. And you know, that would make a big difference. It would mean that if we invest more in child care, we give our kids a stronger foundation to succeed, and we make sure that parents have some support when they're trying to get out there and build a future. So that's one thing we're going to be
And let me add
for.
to that. I think there have been numerous studies that suggest that every dollar we invest in childcare is multiplied many times
That's right.
over. That means that kids are prepared to go to school, do better in school, less likely to drop out,
Right.
more likely to be productive members of society.
It's a smart investment, and we want to make it.
Absolutely. We also are concerned, very concerned, about saving multi-employer pensions. The fact is that what we see now is millions of people in the process of seeing pensions that were promised to them decline by some 60%. I know you have met with some of those folks. I have met with them, Midwest significantly, but all over the country. These are people who, for decades, anticipated being able to retire with decent pensions.
And made their payments.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And
negotiated their employment contracts, so payments were being made to their pensions.
And gave up wage increases in the process.
Yep.
And then as a result of a disastrous middle-of-the-night decision a few years ago here in Congress, that guarantee to them was withdrawn. Now, those people are really hurting. Imagine working your whole life and suddenly find that the pension you were anticipating is going to be cut in half.
That's right.
So we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that the government's promise to those people is kept. They get 100% of what they were promised.
Right. That's exactly right. Seniors. Also, we want to take a look at investing in students. You know, there's a lot that we should be doing. People should not be crushed by student loan payments just trying to get an education. But in particular, I want to focus on one part of the student loan program, and that is for people who go into public service. About 10 years ago, Congress passed the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, and the whole idea was to support Americans who enter public service careers. You know who these folks are. It's teachers, nurses, firefighters, police officers, social workers, military personnel. They work often in lower paying jobs, and the idea is to let them do that work without getting crushed by student loan debt. So we built forgiveness into the program. Go do this work in public service and you'll get loan forgiveness on the other end. But there's a problem with the student loan servicing and complicated program requirements. And there may be tens of thousands of student loan borrowers who are working in public service who might not get the forgiveness that they've earned. Congress can fix this problem right now in the federal spending bill. So we should protect the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program and make sure that our firefighters and our teachers and people who are working in public service get the loan forgiveness that they both need and deserve.
Now, I know this program because I worked with Ed Kennedy.
Yes, you did.
Try to make it happen. And what we are saying, first of all, this student loan situation, I know you have been talking about it for a very long time. Just give you, it's so disastrous. I had a town meeting in Morrisville, Vermont on Monday. Mm-hmm. Some kid raises her hand, and she said, what happens if a parent refuses to sign the application for a student loan? What happens? And after the meeting, a woman came up to me, a mother, and she said, Bernie, I have a kid who graduated college. I have another one who is in college. And I will tell you why parents are hesitant to sign it. We are now $150,000 in debt. We are paying 7.5% interest rates. All right. How insane is that a mother is hesitant to sign a paper allowing her kid to go to college because she's fearful of bankrupting the entire family?
Yeah, and Bernie, she's fearful for good reason. Right now, the debt collectors over at the Department of Education are not just going after students, not just going after parents, they're going after grandparents who have sometimes signed. Right now, they are actually taking Social Security wages away in order to help pay off on student loans. And what sin did these kids commit? They tried to get an education. That's the part that's really stunning.
I want everybody to take a deep breath and take a look at this insanity. The economy is changing. The world is rapidly changing. Technology is changing. And if we want to be competitive in the global economy, we've got to have the best educated workforce in the world. And we have debt collectors at the federal government punishing people, driving them nuts because they did the right thing to get an education. I mean, this is beyond stupidity.
Going beyond driving them nuts, destroying their lives, destroying their credit.
Oh, and by the way, we do have $1 trillion available for tax breaks for the 1%.
Right.
I mean, I want you all just to be thinking about that for a second.
That's why we say budgets are about values.
There's another issue out there that is hitting my state. It's hitting Massachusetts, West Virginia, Kentucky, Ohio, all over this country. And that is the horrific opioid epidemic that we're seeing. In 1 year, more people will die of opioid overdoses than died in the 18 or 20 years of the Vietnam War. Elizabeth, what are we going to do about that?
Well, one of the things we've got to do is it takes resources to fight back. And it takes resources to make sure that there's money available for treatment, and not just immediate treatment, although we, Lord knows, we sure need that. The beds, the personnel who are there doing it, but also the treatment long term. People need support long term. But there's also a connection that we have, and that is with mental health funding. So opioid addiction, I'm all the way in, Bernie, on this one. But to remember, we need more money in mental health overall. You know, I was reading a study the other day that it's estimated that about half of all Americans will experience either addiction or a mental health condition in their lifetime. And without treatment, the effects devastate not only the individual, but their families, their friends. There are federal programs that support mental health treatment. They're already set up, but they're just not funded well enough to be there for people. So waiting lists are long, people can't get in, they can't get help. So we got a chance. Here's this upcoming funding bill, and Congress can double the funding for mental health. An extra $1 billion to programs that right now are supporting treatment for more than 7 million people. It would help us on the opioid epidemic and help us on the mental health front generally.
I'm sure you get the same calls that I get, but my front office relayed to me a few years ago a call that came from a woman. This is what she said. She said, I am worried to death about what my brother will do to himself or to somebody else. And let's be clear, we have thousands of people walking the streets of this country today who are suicidal, who may be homicidal. And this woman said, we have been calling and calling. We cannot get the help that we can afford when we need it. And people in mental health crisis need help today, not next year.
That's right.
All right. So again, this is an investment that makes sense, that saves money, that saves lives. And by the way, one of the entities in this country that provides good counseling are community health centers.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You know, I'm a huge fan of
I know
community
you
health
are.
centers.
We've worked
you know
on
I
that.
am. I love the community health centers. Talk about an approach that's all about every need that people have.
Right.
And that includes mental health needs and it includes addiction treatment.
Now, there's another issue that's out there. Many of our Republican colleagues talk about how much they love the veterans. Oh my God, on Veterans Day, they give these great speeches, how much we are indebted to the veterans, how much we love the veterans, how much we've got to support the veterans. But somehow that rhetoric disappears when it comes to adequate funding for the VA. And right now we have over 30,000 staff positions in VA facilities from coast to coast that are not being filled, including psychologists, including counselors, including our ability to effectively deal with PTSD and other problems associated with wartime service. It seems to me that if we're going to keep faith with the rhetoric that we hear on the floor of the Congress, if we're going to do the right thing for the men and women who put their lives on the line to defend this country, we have to adequately fund the Veterans Administration. And that is one of the goals in our approach.
You know, Bernie, I'm the baby sister for all three of my older brothers who are veterans. All three of them served. My oldest brother was career, served 288 combat missions in Vietnam. And for me, this is about, we honor our promises to our veterans. We asked them to go out and do dangerous things, and they gave us everything they had. And now it's our turn to say, and when you come home, we honor our promises. We're there with a Veterans Administration that has the resources, not just the empty promises, but the resources to be able to serve you.
And that is what every major veterans organization, from the American Legion to the VFW to the DAV, wants us to do.
Yep.
And we have, it seems to me, a moral obligation to do that. All right, there is another issue out there that needs an enormous amount of work. When we talk about the insanities of what's going on in this country today, you have towns in Vermont, you have towns, rural Massachusetts, all over this country where people cannot get decent quality broadband, they can't get decent quality cell phone service. Now you tell me, how do you establish a business in a community where you don't even have good quality broadband? How do the kids access the internet in a way that enables them to get the education that they need?
So, you know, but that's the real point around infrastructure generally, and particularly around rural infrastructure. I go back to what happened in the 1930s. You know, so in the 1930s, about 90% of people living in urban areas had electricity because it made sense for the electricity companies to wire them up because everybody's close together and so on. But only about 10% of those living in rural areas had electricity. And basically, Franklin Roosevelt and Democrats in Congress said, you know, you can't be part of a 20th century economy if you don't have electricity. You can't get your goods out there. You can't start businesses. You can't be part of the economy. And so we said, all of us, whether you have electricity already or not, are going to pitch in some money and help build that infrastructure so that in every part of America there's access to electricity. I see it the same way now. On access to the internet. Come on, give me a
How
break.
do you function?
High-speed broadband.
How do you function as a business, as a student, if you don't have access to high-quality broadband?
It's part of being part of the 21st
and again,
century economy.
You know, this is part of a crumbling infrastructure in general, and it's part of an embarrassment that the United States is way, way behind all countries around the world, where they're, in many cases, their broadband is better and less expensive than it is in the United States of America. So I think if other countries can do it, we can do it. We have to protect rural America. It's a great place to raise kids, but people are not going to stay in rural America if they can't make a living. They can't make a living if they don't have a decent broadband service. All right, so here we are. And folks, we need your help on all of this. Elizabeth can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. In fact, the Congress, those of us who are making these fights, can't do it alone. We need millions of people to begin to stand up and demand that the United States Congress represent all of us and not just a handful of campaign contributors.
You know, that's really what this is about. It's about who Congress is going to represent. Are they just going to be there for the rich and the powerful who've already made it? Or are they going to be there for the American people? You know, look, the Republicans who run Congress, they don't care much about middle-class families. But if they expect Democratic support for their funding bill, then they need to do more to respect working people in this country.
And everything that Elizabeth and I have talked about, these are not fringe ideas, these are not radical ideas, they're not socialistic ideas. These are the ideas that the American people want. And our job is to educate, to organize, to mobilize, to demand that this Congress finally does the work that the American people want us to do.
That's what Bernie and I are fighting for. We're in this fight all the way. We need you in it too.
Okay, folks, thank you so much. Let's keep going forward.
Yeah. Don't do this.